Welcome to Global From Washington, D.C., we'll be speaking with Cynthia Richie Terrell, founder of RepresentWomen.org. Represent Women's mission is to strengthen democracy by advancing reforms that break down barriers to ensure more women can run, win, serve, and lead. Cynthia, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. For the first time in American history, the vice president-elect is not a man. Kamala Harris is not only the first woman vice president, but also the first African-American and first South Asian American, making her the highest-ranking woman in America's 244-year history. What does this mean for the women's political movement? What does it mean for the United States?
Well, I think it's very exciting. I'm sure some of your viewers caught some of the dancing in the streets in New York and in Washington, D.C. When the Biden-Harris ticket was finally declared the winner this last Saturday. So I think there's just a lot of pure joy and excitement. There's a laser focus, of course, on the fact that she's the first woman elected as vice president, and as you said, the first woman of color elected. I think that is bound to have a huge impact, not only on girls in the United States and around the world, but also on boys, of course, too. It's really a lesson, I think, for boys and girls and young people everywhere that women of color are leaders. I also think there's a intangible impact on other sectors. I think when we see women's leadership in one sector, in the corporate sector, for example, I think it can't help but influence women's representation and leadership in other sectors. So I suspect it will have a lasting impact in that respect.
You established RepresentWomen.org. Can you tell our viewers about your organization?
Sure, I'd be glad to. In the year 2000, the United States ranked 46 for women's representation internationally. And then as we got close to the suffrage centennial in 2020, I realized that the United States had dropped to about 100th internationally. And it's not that the women somehow in the United States were deficient or not clever or trained, but we really began to see that there were rules and systems that were being used around the world that could help to accelerate the pace of progress toward gender parity in the United States. So I founded Represent Women to focus on those best practices, many of which are happening all around the world and some of which are happening in the United States. And so we study those best practices and we find ways to visualize the data and then to communicate to elected officials and lawmakers so that they can make advances to get more women into elected office.
Let's see. The presidential race was quite close. Despite Donald Trump's racist remarks and disrespect towards women, more than 70 million people still voted for him. What is his appeal? Do you think that the 74 million people who voted for Joe Biden were pro-Biden or anti-Trump? Did you expect Joe Biden to win?
Well, let's see. I'll try to answer all those questions in reverse order. Yes, I did think that Joe Biden would win, partly because that's what the polls were telling us. But even though some of the polls were a little generous, Biden did perform as well as we thought in a number of states, in enough states to make him the winner of the election. I think that, yes, people were enthusiastically voting for Joe Biden, and perhaps in part because of the economic and health crisis in the United States. Many Americans believe that we need a safer and more reliable path in our future. But I do think that the part of the reason that the Trump supporters stayed strong, and he does have a legitimate and powerful base, we all have to admit, is that I think that voters in those areas really have serious economic challenges. And the manufacturing jobs and coal jobs and jobs in steel mills in the Midwest and in Pennsylvania have left the United States, and they're not coming back. Trump told them he was going to bring those jobs back, but we know that that's not a feasible future for the United States to be investing in coal or steel and manufacturing. So I think that many of those voters probably still believed that they were going to have their job back and their economy was going to be strong. But I think Joe Biden was able to prevail because he offers some new way forward economically and investment into other kinds of enterprises.
I see. Now, what changes are you expecting in the upcoming Joe Biden era?
I I expect from what Joe Biden says, he said during the debate, and he said it in his acceptance speech on Saturday, that he's going to focus quite a bit on really grappling with climate change, and that's going to entail quite a bit of investment in alternative energy sources, wind and solar. A lot of retraining programs I expect will be happening to make sure that Americans are getting back to work and are gainfully employed. I suspect that he's going to be focused on education. His wife, Jill Biden, is a teacher, and she has a great quote, once a teacher, always a teacher. She's going to keep teaching, even though she is now the First Lady. I expect there'll be some good discussion about racial justice and how we can move forward in both rural and urban communities to figure out the best policing, to figure out better training for people who are supposedly keeping us safe.
Now, finally, Cynthia, can you tell us about the economic situation in your area?
Sure. It's interesting because I live in Washington, D.C., which is really a pretty stable economy because the government provides so many jobs here. There's quite a bit of investment in the infrastructure. The metro system and so forth is all established to really make it possible for the government, the federal government, to work. So there's quite a bit of stability, I would say, where I am. Of course, that doesn't mean that there aren't small businesses that are wrestling with the challenges of the coronavirus. But overall, where I am economically, things are looking pretty stable, which is a relief.
Cynthia Richie Terrell, founder of Represent Women, thank you so much for being on Global Science today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you. In the Washington, D.C. area, Cynthia believes that due to good planning, the economic situation is stable. I want to thank everyone again today for joining us on Global Science. Until we meet again next week, please be safe and healthy.